Hey everyone, my name is Nathan Bird, founder of AquaCon Acquisition Conference coming to Salt Lake City on March 21st, 2025, and I'm joined here with David Bradford. He's a proven business leader with over 45 years of experience in the computer industry. David Bradford is the CEO of Fluent Worlds, which is revolutionizing language training in 3D virtual worlds. David has been the CEO of not one, but two companies that reached the Forbes list of America's 50 fastest growing tech companies, HireVue and Fusion.io. He was also an executive for 15 years at Novell, helping guide the networking juggernaut from 40 million in sales to over 2 billion. He will be joining us on our sales side panel at the upcoming acquisition conference, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Nathan, it's a pleasure.
You know, all these stories, I just feel like you're a wealth of knowledge, and I'm excited to be able to dig a little deeper, get to know you a little bit better today, and help share with our fellow founders some education that will help them through not only just growing their business, but a potential acquisition and also the sell of a company, and do it in the right way.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about how there are negatives that happen through an acquisition. So share with us real quick why you love what you do. I think that's the first thing I'd love to start with.
Well, I'm glad you asked. I started my career as a lawyer. I was in the law practice really for the first quarter century of my career. I was general counsel of Novell. And as you mentioned, we saw that company grow from like 150 employees to over 10,000, much of which was done through acquisition over the years. And so that was a great honor and a privilege to be the chief legal counsel for that juggernaut, so to speak. But I will tell you that I also have always had a love of business. So while I was getting my law degree, a little later, I got a master's in business administration and MBA, and then morphed to the business side of things. And so for the last 25 years, I've been more on the CEO side of running tech companies.
There's so many different differences there, but also the discipline that it takes one to be able to get to where you want to go. I mean, you have the discipline to finish college and then get into, a career, but then now you just never know in life, right? You've got so many moving parts. You've got one door closes and another door opens. So how did you find yourself, in a leadership position and then also becoming a CEO?
Interesting question. It goes back to high school. I grew up in a little town in Montana called Red Lodge. I'm a proud graduate of Red Lodge High School in 1969. And I was senior class president, and I was always in leadership roles. I remember when I was 16 years old, I got called by my branch president of the LDS church at the time to be the Sunday school president of all things. And so I just kind of naturally, I think it was my mother's training, her vision. She was the stake primary president, et cetera. So I always took on leadership roles and felt very comfortable doing that from high school on. In fact, one of the scholarships that I got when I attended BYU was a leadership thing. I was the Lieutenant Governor of Boise State, Secretary of State of Montana, Boise State, and Mayor of the outstanding city, coming from this little bitty town of Red Lodge. And, all the big high schools were in Great Falls and Billings and Missoula and so forth. But somehow I emerged from Red Lodge and took leadership roles. And so that's always been kind of my part of my DNA, I guess.
It's interesting to come from a small town and then have now this insatiable desire and taste for technology.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So you come from a small town. I'm very similar in that nature, and I'm sure we'll go into that. But share with us more about how that began as well. So getting into technology.
Well, the year I graduated from law school in the new BYU Law School in 1977, I was in the second graduating class, and we were not accredited. It was hard to find job openings, et cetera. But my wife had been born in Southern California, and I'd been born in Burbank as well, and we hadn't this desire to make our fame and fortune back in Southern California when we graduated from law school. So I found a job with a law firm in Hollywood, California, by the name of Ersfeld and Younger. And that was 1977, and I was a lawyer there for 3 years. But after 3 years, kind of a desire to do something more with my life rather than just, hitting a clock and doing service hours, I found myself looking for something more. And so I began looking in a legal newspaper in Southern California. That's the way we did things back in 1980. You looked at the newspaper for job openings, and there was this little ad, Prime Computer, Boston, Massachusetts, looking for regional legal counsel. And so I left the law firm, joined Prime Computer as their Western Regional Legal Counsel, and they got me into tech. And that was in March of 1980, which now is coming right up on 45 years. Yeah, crazy. So that's how I got into tech.
That's the heyday of technology, right?
I started at a company called Prime Computer. So the history of the computer industry is at a very high level. You had the mainframe computers back in the 60s and 70s, featuring IBM and Honeywell and Cray were the big mainframe suppliers. And then along came what was known as a super mini computer. But it wasn't a mini computer in the sense that we think of now. These were, housed maybe in a room about this size that we're in now, maybe 10 by 20. They weren't as big as mainframes. They cost maybe $300,000 to $500,000, but they were known as the super mini computers. And it kind of revolutionized things and took it from the mainframe era to the super mini computer. And then 5 years later, we hit the PC era. In 81, IBM shipped its first PC, personal computer, out of Boca Raton, Florida. And there was a company in Provo, Utah by the name of Novell. And it became the first company that interconnected these IBM personal computers so they could talk to each other. And so that's what took me into the era of the PC and network computing. Mainframe to super minis to the era of PC personal computers and the networking of those devices.
What would you say contributed to the immense growth that Novell went through? Because you grew while you were there from 40 to 2 billion plus.
Right.
What are some of the main contributing factors?
The main driver there is that we were the company that kind of had invented network computing. There was a group out of BYU with Drew Major, Kyle Powell, et cetera, and they had invented something called the NetWare operating system. And the NetWare operating system was similar to a PC operating system like DOS, but it interconnected two personal computers so they could share hard disk drive, storage, et cetera. And so that was what was happening during the era. And when the PC era took off, we took off right along with it. And we were the juggernaut, if you will, in PC networking. So if you had 10 personal computers in your accounting office and you needed to share data among those computers, Novell NetWare was a must. There were other competitors out there, but in the heyday, we owned 65 to 70% of the network operating system market. And so as the PC market exploded with IBM and then Dell and these companies that distributed IBM PCs, we grew right along with that.
What were some of your responsibilities there at Novell? You began as the lawyer, but then, of course, like I said, doors close and another amazing door opens.
Well, at the time, Ray Norda was my boss early on at Novell from 1985 to 1995. And then later came Eric Schmidt. And that's a name that many of your listeners will recognize. He was the chairman, CEO of Google later. But before that, he was the chief technology officer of a company called Sun Microsystems. So Eric came in to replace Ray and Bob Frankenberg as CEO at Novell. And that changed my life and the course of my life because Eric came in and says, David, you have so many talents. You could do so many things for us. I want you to continue running the legal group, but I also want to expand your responsibilities. So he gave me business and corporate development. He gave me security for the company and 3 or 4 other divisions that I ran, all as an executive VP at Novell. And so that got me working in the space of just outside of pure legal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as business development and understanding the entirety of the business, you've got to know every aspect of it to be able to, of course, attract and sell whatever you have.
Right. And I was naturally attracted to the business side. I loved what we did. I saw it grow from 10 million in sales a quarter to over 450 million in sales a quarter. It was nuts.
So a lot of these big companies that we know of, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, the list goes on, they do acquisitions.
Yes.
And they do it very strategically.
Yeah.
Was there any strategy that you guys put in place for the acquisitions of other companies? And then if so, walk me through maybe 1 or 2 acquisitions that you felt went really well, and then maybe 1 or 2 that didn't go so well.
Yeah. Wow. Great question. In the strategy side of things, we were always looking to fill holes in our product line. I think that's the thing that when what is it that we're missing? What is it that we could be better at, et cetera? There was a company called Exelon in 1987 that was one of my first acquisitions at Novell. When I say mine, it was a team effort.
Yep.
Clearly, I was leading the legal side of that. But we bought a company called Exelon and expanded the Novell product offering significantly and also got us a Bay Area existence. We were based primarily in Utah at the time, but we needed to expand geographically. And so Exelon did both of those things. They filled a hole in our product line that we needed improved on, and they gave us a base presence in the Silicon Valley and helped our leadership team. We got a guy named Conwell Recchi, who was the CEO of Exelon. He became an executive VP at Novell, served on our board. Jim Tolanen, who was the chief technology officer, the CFO, chief financial officer of Exelon, became our CFO for Novell, et cetera. So that was a significant acquisition and one that went really well.
How do you measure the success rate of the acquisition? Is it the way that the team works together? Is it perfect product fit? Because you've laid out a few very strategic things, right? Positioning, product, but then also what was the integration process like, and was that fairly easy or pretty difficult?
That one was particularly easy because they were looking for an acquirer, and we were the dominant network operating system supplier, so their product line fit nicely into it. But more than that, people mean everything. And by that, I've given speeches over the years. I'm fond of saying that 60% of the success of any company is based on its people. Not its technology, not its go-to-market strategy, not the timing of when you're doing things, but on its people. So you can have an absolutely A product, but if you have C players, you're not going to win in the market. The converse is if you have A players on your team, and you can have a C product and succeed because those A managers will figure it out. Now, the combination of those 2 deals brought us some great managers into our organization, strengthened our leadership team with some brilliant technology people and go-to-market strategists, et cetera. But it also brought us and filled a hole in our product line. And so trust immediately happened in that particular deal. And that was a really, really nice success.
Walk us through a failure and what type of failure of a target that you guys were looking at, and why did it not work out? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. Sadly,
Hmm.
Novell bought WordPerfect Corporation circa 1994. And they were a big company. They were one of the four largest software companies in the world. We forget, sitting here today, that back in the 80s and 90s, the four largest software companies in the world weren't Oracle, weren't, companies we think about today, but rather companies like Microsoft, Lotus, Novell, and WordPerfect. So, two of the world's four largest software companies were located in Utah County back in the 80s and 90s. And so Novell thought it would be a good strategic move to get into the applications market. So WordPerfect had really invented the word processing industry, and they had a tremendous product in WordPerfect, their word processing software. We knew Microsoft up in Redmond was expanding with Microsoft Word, and they were acquiring applications as well to layer on top of their PC operating system, DOS, and then Windows. And so we felt like to compete with Microsoft, to stay ahead of the game, we needed to acquire an application supplier, and that was WordPerfect. Now, unfortunately, it didn't turn out the way we thought it would. And if I think back, I think the main reason there why that deal failed was trust. The culture of Novell and WordPerfect were widely disparate. Even though we were based in the same part of the country, I think there was just a cultural divide there. And when trust doesn't exist, everything slows down like molasses because people try to figure out how to protect their backside, and they become risk averse, so they're scared to make a play or to do program code or to do whatever it might be to advance the corporation. Instead, they're thinking, how do I protect my job? And that is not how a good acquisition succeeds. You've got to be mutually aligned and moving forward where everybody trusts the other person. And if you and I were doing a deal together, we have to have trust. And where trust exists, we're going to get that deal done quickly. It's in relationships as well, in your marriage and whatever. Where trust exists, fundamentally things move much more rapidly. And the same thing happens in a corporation. And so because of the cultural divide between those two companies, trust did not exist, unfortunately. And as a result, sales declined, and we had to actually then lay off some people, and we sold WordPerfect to Corel Corporation just 2 years after we did the deal.
Interesting how there's an erosion that can take place, and your performance suffers as a result of the trust that doesn't exist. But you can't fake trust. You cannot be inauthentic. You have to be authentically connected with the overall outcome, and that's what it sounds like you're saying. And it's so important to do that.
And I think there was fault on both sides in that particular deal. I will say this. We look down I-15 corridor now, and we see beautiful Lehi, Utah, that has exploded, blossomed like a rose, so to speak. And that's due to the Novell acquisition of WordPerfect and the money that was paid to Alan Ashton, primarily, who was the CEO of WordPerfect at the time. He got roughly between, I don't know, $250, $300 million out of that deal. And he then took that money, bought all of that land at the point of the mountain, created Thanksgiving Point, and then Thanksgiving Point became the centerpiece around which all of those other companies in Lehi have been built out. So Silicon Slopes, as it exists today, is essentially the
byproduct of an acquisition.
Yes, of the Novell WordPerfect acquisition. Absolutely. Yeah.
Man, there's a lot here. I know. There's so many stories, and there's so many experiences. at the end of the day, and I've done this multiple times, I've spoken with a lot of founders and people that have gone through acquisitions. It comes down to the people. It comes down to trust, just like what you said. But I'm trying to figure out what the erosion of that trust and how that occurs, because you have excitement from one side to the next, right? Think about it. It's like you're excited to buy my company, and I'm excited that you're going to buy my company. And then we start to get into the depths of due diligence, the depths of synergy that may or may not exist within now our organization that we're starting to figure out. Now, how does it start to erode? Is it the money that plays a factor?
Not so much. I think the erosion there was we had people running our sales organization that had a different philosophy as to how to implement WordPerfect and how to integrate it into our product lines, et cetera.
Okay.
And there was differences on go-to-market strategies and those sorts of things. We just could never get around those. And so
Vision.
And I would say maybe Novell didn't do as great a job with due diligence at the time to really understand the go-to-market strategies of the WordPerfect products. They were beloved by many end users, particularly law firms around the globe, loved WordPerfect. They loved it over any of the Microsoft products, Microsoft Word, et cetera. But, when he got down to the people and implementation, there would be different agreements over, what is the sales force? WordPerfect had a direct sales model. Our Novell had an indirect sales model. We sold through distribution, whereas WordPerfect sold primarily directly to the end user customers. That's a big overlay and didn't fit exactly. But in general, that's what it looked like. And so going directly, we were not good at going direct. We'd always go through our distributors. And so I think that was one of the problems. We also didn't understand fully, and when I say we didn't do our due diligence properly, just how fragile the word processing market was and how quickly Microsoft would grab market share. Microsoft actually tied their products together both from a legal standpoint as well as from a technological standpoint. We eventually filed a lawsuit against Microsoft for the way in which they tied all of their products together and created what was called restraints of trade in the market. And that lawsuit eventually won in the courts, and Microsoft was declared a monopolist. But it was too little too late. It took 8 years for that,
That's a long lawsuit.
That's a long lawsuit and a long time. And in the meantime, you're losing market share. And so we were rapidly losing market share in the word processing market. And so
That's
forth.
interesting.
Microsoft was very aggressive.
We just had somebody on the podcast a few days ago that was 21 years Microsoft employee.
I probably know them.
Yeah, it was very interesting. You being a leader, let's walk us through some words of wisdom that you would give us or give those out there that they're going through these situations. They need to establish a new vision or enable two teams to come together, because that's what I'm seeing that you guys had to do at every corner. You had to go through, hey, sales and distribution, this is exactly how we're going to do it. But then one party would say, that's not how we're going to do it.
Yep.
And then another would say, well, no, this is how we're going to do it. How do we look to see and be understanding of each side and then cast a new vision? So you now, as a leader who's been in that position for many, many years, how would you do it differently, but also how do you do it now?
Well, I'll give you one very specific instance in my career that was defining, if you will. And it's really lessons that I'd learned from the failed Novell WordPerfect merger, because trust has to exist. And so I was brought into a situation in 2008, roughly, to become CEO of a company here, Little Salt Lake City-based company called Fusion.io. They had done $1 million in sales the prior year, but there had been some problems with their leader. And I had been chairman of the advisory board for Fusion.io. And so we had to get rid of that former CEO, and I was brought in as CEO. And the first thing I had to do was absolutely reestablish trust. And so here's what I did. I found the author of the book, The Speed of Trust. It's a book I highly recommend. It's written by Stephen M.R. Covey. He's the son of Steve Covey, who's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, etc. Steve Covey, his dad, wrote that book. Well, Stephen M.R. Covey wrote a book that, in my estimation, is just as important, called The Speed of Trust. And I brought him onto my advisory board. And we had several meetings, company-wide meetings to reestablish trust, et cetera. He gave us tools and thoughts and processes that would, reconnect people. And once that trust was reestablished in that organization, we went from $1 million in sales to $100 million in sales in about 3 years. It was a crazy ride. And a lot of that I attribute to reestablishing trust in the organization and then bringing in new players from the outside who are fresh faces that were proven in the industry, et cetera, that immediately commanded respect. I think of Dennis Wolf, the CFO I brought in out of the Bay Area, and I think of Jim Dawson, my Chief Revenue Officer, CRO, that I brought in to that organization, along with multiple other people. And that really reestablished the trust, and then things were able to take off.
As a leader, you know what needs to be done, and then sometimes it's not always you that needs to do it. There are other people that may be better, or you have tacticianers in specific areas. And that's really what makes a wonderful leader, because you're doing it shoulder to shoulder, you're side by side with your people, but you're also learning from experts and being okay to learn as well. I mean, just like what you're doing today, you come on this podcast and you say, hey, I'm ready. I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about, but hey, I'm here. And a lot of people just got to show up. You got to be assertive in what you do and how you do it, and also having other people around you that can make your team strong. And it sounds like that's what you've done.
I think the biggest lesson that I've learned over my multiple years in leadership roles, et cetera, in the computer industry is I don't care if you're Steve Jobs. I don't care if you're Eric Schmidt. I don't care if you're, Bill Gates. Every one of those leaders I've had personal interface with over time, interactions over time, et cetera. They all have their deficits. They all have their blind spots. I want to be really clear. I love Eric Schmidt, deep respect, but he had his blind spots. Bill Gates had massive blind spots. Sorry, folks, if you're Microsoft fans, but he was smarter than a whip. But I met with him when Microsoft tried to buy Novell, 1993, late 93, and I can remember him rocking across the desk at me, and we're talking about intellectual property and who gets what, et cetera, et cetera. And that was a failed merger. It never happened. But clearly, we spent 4 months working on putting together Microsoft and Novell merger. Didn't work. But the message I want people to understand out there is that every leader, I don't care who they are, have their blind spots, and the best leaders in the world recognize what those blind spots are, and they bring in people to help them smooth and, fill in those blind spots.
About that merger that was a failed merger.
Yeah.
Let's open that up just a little bit. Just a little bit. Doesn't have to go too far, but man, I'm curious. So you're sitting across the table from Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Of course, it's Bill Gates prior to obviously the massive expansion and globally recognized. Obviously, it's still a building company, but they're trying to come in and buy you.
Yeah.
How did we structure that? What eventually didn't work, and how were those conversations?
So again, that one boils down to trust a little bit, and I'll explain. So Ray Norda and I, along with Drew Major and some of our other great people, Jan Newman, Richard King, et cetera, we were all part of that deal. And we flew up to Redmond on several occasions to try to get that deal done. We had bought a company called DRDOS, Digital Research Corporation, out of Monterey, California. We bought that, I want to say, mid-93, late 93. Well, that company competed directly with Microsoft DOS. MS-DOS was the first PC operating system. But it wasn't the first PC operating system. The first PC operating system was built by Gary Kildall, CEO of Digital Research Corporation in Monterey, California. Well, in 93, Novell buys Digital Research. Gates gets angry because here's Novell off going to compete with him in his sacred PC operating system market where he held 90% market share. But hey, we sent a message. We were ready to go toe-to-toe. So he calls my boss, and I remember Ray calls me into the office when Gates is screaming at him. What the hell are you thinking about? Why would you ever buy DRDOS? That deal has got to stop. You got to get rid of that. I'll buy you, but you got to get rid of DRDOS. And Nordic courageously says, no, we're not going to get rid of DRDOS, but we can talk about you're acquiring us. So the next 4 months, 6 months, early 94, we have these broad conversations with Microsoft about getting a deal done. The biggest concern from a legal standpoint, and as chief legal counsel, I was concerned about this, and my outside counsel was Larry Sonsini, who was on our board and chairman of Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati, the definitive Bay Area law firm. Larry and I were both concerned that if we took a Novell Microsoft combination to the U.S. Department of Justice, that they would turn the deal down. Simply because we own 65% of the network operating system market. Microsoft owned 90% of the disk PC operating system market. And
it's too big.
It was too big. And we would absolutely have created the definitive juggernaut. So we were concerned from a legal standpoint whether we could get that passed. And I remember Gates saying in one of our meetings, I remember him kind of waving his hand and saying something like, hey, don't worry about the Department of Justice. I'll take care of them. I was like, dude.
Okay.
Okay. So the discussions continued, and it eventuated in a letter written from Bill Gates to Larry Sonsini. It said, Dear Larry, who's on our board, this is hereby extend an offer to buy Novell for $10 billion. That was the price tag, $10 billion. Think about that. That's 1994, and we had an offer for $10 billion to buy Novell. Now, so we're going along trying to work out, what would that combination look like? Who would work in Redmond? Who would work in Provo, et cetera. And while we were working that deal, and this is where trust comes into play, suddenly Microsoft announces publicly, without saying anything to us, that they were acquiring another company. Not necessarily another company in our space, but another company. I think it was, I want to say accounting software or something like that. We can look that one up. But when they did that, Norda, my boss, CEO of Novell at the time, went ballistic because it just showed the brazen attitude. And if Gates wasn't going to pick up the phone and simply say to Ray, hey, Ray, we're looking at buying this other company. I know it might slow down our other deal, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think? He never said that. They went out and bought this company, got publicly announced. And of course, Novell and Microsoft were public companies at the time. It just showed a lack of trust from Gates to Norda, and eventually broke the deal down. And Ray was so outraged, we eventually wrote a letter. We had concerns on the antitrust side, to be sure, but eventually we wrote a letter back to Microsoft and says, no, not going to do it. And that's what kind of led to our desire to buy WordPerfect and consolidate.
And start competing more.
And start competing, and so forth. So many stories around.
What a
that.
good story, though. I mean, there's so many so many stories just like that. I mean, not exactly like that, because obviously that's at the highest level. But well,
I will say this. I want to tease your readers with this, or your listeners with this one. Go out and find out whatever happened to Gary Kildall. Gary was the man who invented the personal computer operating system, PhD out of the Naval Research Laboratories in the 70s. And what happened to Gary Kildall?
Okay.
I'd be curious. I'm
curious now. Is he still alive?
Do you want to know the answer?
No, we can't tell everybody. They'll have to go research.
Go research it.
Well,
I'll tell you when we're off air what happened to Kildall.
Well, hey, guys, we just want to say thank you so much for watching today, as well as listening to the Acquisition IQ podcast. And, we've got a big event coming up here in Salt Lake City. We're excited to be able to have more conversations just like this from people that have a wealth of knowledge and experience, just like yourself here. So if you guys want to come, make sure to grab your seat at aquacon.live, and you'll meet people just like David here in the room. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you again soon.